place to beat the decks that are trying to beat the combo decks, if that makes sense. So I think, although it definitely has some bad matchups, just for where we may be heading with the meta, it might actually be a good deck.
Well, we shall wait and see. Frenetic keeping Spectral Sight in non-outcast in Demon Hunter, which is a slight point of contention. I don't mind it too much going first because there's only like one card of interruption that goes in the middle, but keeping it far right on the coin can be a little scary because there's then two cards that can come in and fill those gaps that can potentially block you or soft lock you, as Gia was calling it earlier, which I quite liked. But I think keeping it here, just you see just the Immolation Aura coming out far left to quote block the Spectral Sight, but that shouldn't be that big a deal. He'll find an opportunity to use Spectral Sight against this deck sooner rather than later, I would imagine.
And checking out Bozzzton's hand, one thing to keep in mind, at least I have found with this deck, I'm not sure how much you've played it yourself, but initially I was being very greedy with Shadow Steps, and I felt that was very wrong the more I played it. I think Shadow Step, unlike other previous versions of Rogue, you use it to just cycle SI cards, get through the quest quickly, and sometimes there are some great targets, of course, like SI Assassin you can see in hand there. If you can insta-kill 2 minions for like effectively 0 mana a lot of the time, that's very strong. But in general, if you don't have a good play in the following turn, and Bozzzton could Shadow Step this SI to then get a gadget, I think that's a very, very good play.
Frenetic, on the other hand, a little bit stuck. He is just going to use up that Immolation Aura. This is the question I was wondering about, because it is a very good card, I would say, in the matchup, particularly like a spell damage Immolation Aura, and particularly for preventing that one-off win condition I was talking about, right? If they get to Scabs and they make the 7/7, they give it stealth. Obviously, the idea is that you then drop Lotheb, as has just come into hand, and then deal a ton of damage with it instead, which you're hoping is then lethal, like alongside the weapon and maybe one other minion that sticks, and you just deal infinite damage that way. If you're able to just stack up one big like spell damage Moarg Immolation Aura going into that turn and just delete everything, that's usually enough to give you as much time as you need, right, to pull together some kind of win condition as Demon Hunter. So I do think Immolation Aura is a valuable card. I said he'll find a use for it sooner rather than later, but I thought, it might clean up 2 or 3 minions and maybe a 2/2 stealth, for example, that was going to come down at some point. But Frenetic choosing to just dump it just to get on with his life instead, which I don't mind at all.
Yeah, and in a weird way, you'll probably understand what I mean, but luckily enough, he's got the second one. Obviously, you're normally trying to cycle for the combo in Demon Hunter, but he has that second one ready now, especially at that 1 mana. Means he can probably make it work. Bozzzton had a pretty rough turn last turn, just having to dagger up because he used the coin to actually get out the SI7 agent. But he does now have the Infiltrator now. Your favourite card in the list just to dump down, and Frenetic does have to do something about this, and this is like, I guess, the argument for this card that people have made is, yes, it's not really that great, it's kind of okay against Mage because everyone's just playing Ice Barrier, but it is an aggressive minion, right? The stats are your 5 attack, 4 health, like if you leave it down, that can make up some of the damage that Rogue needs to really push the ending of the game.
And this is a glass half full, glass half empty kind of situation with Frenetic's hand right now, because this is the kind of hand that can brick horribly for the next 2 or 3 turns. It's not that likely because there's so much card draw in the deck overall, but it can happen. But on the plus side, it's also just an Il'gynoth draw away from a good time at this point, right? Like, it'll take a few turns for the mana to tick up to the point where it does achieve lethal, but that is a ton of damage building up.
Is it crazy to play Informant and just sap the 1/1 here? Because it can't be played next turn, which might force it into a non-outcast position. It's just a card in hand. And what else are you going to sap against Demon Hunter?
Not a bad idea. I'll give you that. So, well, sometimes I have had... again, I've been playing this matchup a lot more from the Demon Hunter side than the Rogue side. But it has been annoying sometimes when they've sapped a Moarg, right? Because it's something that I have tried to abuse once or twice. I know the list. I know they don't have that many spells. They can point at a Moarg and actually punish it for being a Moarg, right? So you just play it out there. So sometimes they use the sap. And of course, although it seems dangerous to give you a Moarg back, it's not like you can just play it again the next turn and then lethal them, right? So it does have some upside in that regard. But as soon as you mentioned the play, I did actually kind of like it. And yeah, Bozzzton seemed to agree in the end.
Yeah, not too many options, and again, I think it's just worthwhile to just make the 5/5 stick as much as possible here. He does have a Lotheb in hand, but I think it might be quite likely that we see some kind of Neophyte swindle with a Shadow Step on the Neophyte or the Informant, depending on how Bozzdton's feeling, because that Informant does sort of stack itself as well as an SI card, gaining +1/+1.
Right.
Or maybe even along the lines of now, because he has Battlemaster, could go for like Neophyte, Shadow Step Neophyte with Infiltrator next to the Informant.
Setting that up for the Wind Fury next turn is what you're saying? Like trying to protect that board with the Neophyte? That's not bad. So you'd be pushing 5 and you'd have 10 in play. So it is a lethal setup, right? It would have to be respected.
Arguably more with the Neophyte, right?
Oh, you're shadow stepping it and replaying it again.
Yes, double Neophyte. Make it as ultra safe as possible, right?
Yeah, I can see that.
Looks like I think that was Bozzdton locking in Swindle.
It was, yeah.
Okay.
Picks up some Wicked Stabs, though. This is the upside, right? Because there's a pretty low number of spells in the deck overall. Is it casting Swindle, which guarantees you 1 spell, 1 minion? It's actually quite likely to find you that extra damage with the Wicked Stab anyway. Has its upsides as well.
I mean, my glasses on to read this hand.
Have to blink here.
Pleasure doing
You can do some cycling first with the tradable cards. Oh my goodness.
He could just go Guild Immolation or right?
Yeah, again, that's kind of scary though, because of what I was talking about before with the giving Scab stealth once the quest line gets fully completed. You do tend to want to have the Immolation Aura for that instance. I think Frenetic might blink and just break up some of this combo right now because he has enough of it, right? Like there's plenty going on in his hand to be able to spare a combo piece or two.
Yeah, I mean, he has the Philosophy, right, which makes up for a lot of the damage this Moarg's gonna lose, I guess.
Right. Yeah. He's going to drop it this time. He's considered it once. There's a really weird consideration when your Philosophy costs mana. So if you haven't discounted Philosophy and you have a Moarg in your hand that you also haven't discounted and you have 1 mana at the end of a turn, that's a very hard decision to make because you might not pay the 1 mana for that Philosophy and be punished for that later, right? Because you didn't spend that 1 mana on Philosophy when you could. However, next turn, you could draw a Moarg and get it discounted, right? Like Sigil could draw a Moarg and then that whole 5 cards that you draw that turn also gets discounted. Then you have a 0 mana Moarg in your hand and you can Philosophy that one instead, which ends up saving you mana in the long run. So there's pros and cons to both of those options. I think Frenetic, up until this point, turned it down once, but now he's drawn the other Moarg, sees that it costs 2 in hand, so he's like, okay, well at this point, I might as well use the Philosophy now while I have the 1 mana spare, which is what he ends up doing.
Yeah, makes sense. Bozzdton will have this Assassin down to a very, very low mana cost after this SR7 agent. Can snipe away this Moarg, no problem. He is going to Shadow Step the SI7 agent as well. Just finish the quest and get Spymaster Scabs in hand.
This guy's toast.
He uses the Assassin to take care of the Moarg. Does drop a very aggressive board state himself. Uses the stealth piece that he's picked up already along the way, and he's going to be getting another one of those along the line. So this is a very scary setup now for Bozzdton because he's kind of demanding multiple AoEs, having already seen 2 get used to by Frenetic before this point.
Yeah, and the general setup as well to think about now is Scabs gives you 1 of each gizmo, and the main ones you're really thinking about are the +2 attack and stealth that we see on the Assassin right now, which you do on Scabs, and also the weapon, which is a 3/2 weapon, so you effectively bank 6 damage over the course of like the combo setup and the combo turn. So it's going to start adding up to a ton of damage. This Immolation Aura from Frenetic is very much needed right now.
And I believe now with that Il'gynoth getting discounted, all he needs to do is be alive this turn, right? Because he has Il'gynoth plus Moarg is 5, plus Moarg is 7, plus a Arcanist is 8, plus Fellscream Blast is still 8, and that is 36 damage on the following turn. However, our good friend Cult Neophyte can certainly have something to say about that. Actually, can it? No, it can't. It's still lethal.
No, I was just counting it. I was like, nope.
Yeah.
Bozzzton doesn't know that, of course, but yeah, the 0 mana Fellscream going up to 1 is just about enough mana as a total of 9 for this turn.
Yeah, that's right. And the Loatheb coming down here would push 16 Wicked Stab, only being 20 here, so still short in terms of damage. No Secret Passage to go digging. Scabs is not going to represent enough damage here with the gadgets that are being offered. You get the +2 attack from the Stealth Gizmo, and you get the weapon, which is 3 more damage, but that's not going to be enough either.
Yeah, I think realistically, it's this turn probably looks like just setting up Scabs and hoping for the best. You can stealth Scabs, you can equip the weapon, and you can say bounce the Arcanist, go face with what he has, and then try and set up after that. Outside of that, it would be mana spent on the Neophyte.
That's the other option, right? He can play Scabs, pick the top deck, and play Neophyte. That's the most defensive play he could make this turn. We see he still dies through that.
Yeah, it's really tough as well because knowing there's X amount of discounts with only 6 cards left in the deck, like, but you have to sit there and think, what does Cult Neophyte actually realistically do at this point in the game?
Right.
With 9 mana, if this was like turn 6, 7, you can talk, right? But with 9 mana, that's a lot to spare in this Demon Hunter list.
As long as we have counted this correctly, which Frenetic seems to agree that we have, this is just going to be a 1 mana Fellscream Blast here, which is going to make no difference to the state of the lethal. That is still going to be 36 damage. I like the point that you raise around Neophyte there at the end, is that it's a much harder card to use these days in Demon Hunter. I think it was a lot clearer before when you would play it to block their skull, or you would have a very nice read on I'm going to die this turn, so I'll use Neophyte to protect myself. Or you just build a huge board and you drop the Neophyte to protect from Immolation or whatever else, right? Against this version of Demon Hunter, I'm a lot more willing to just play a Cult Neophyte on turn 2 or turn 3, right? Like, just to block like a Spectral Sight or an Acrobatics to complete a questline stage early in the game, right? Just to slow them down by that 1 turn early on, because when you get into the later game stages, I think you're absolutely right in that it's almost impossible to get a good read on whether or not Cult Neophyte is going to have a significant impact on the state of the game. I think you just saw the perfect illustration of that right there at the end, where, you know, lethal still achieved through Cult Neophyte, because Fellscream Blast being discounted is very common these days, being able to use a 0 mana Fellscream Blast.
I think that's it, right? I think at that point, after you've seen waves of reductions, if the plan is, oh, well, none of their combo cards or spells got reduced, it's like, well, if that happens anyway, you're probably in a good place, you play the turn out and win. But a lot of the time that doesn't happen, and there's something going to be reduced there, so definitely a tough one there. The only interesting point I think I could look at from the rogue side was whether there was an earlier setup and just don't care about going for Scabs and just go for like a bounce Neophyte with those 2 minions on board already. It might not have paid off, but it was just something to think about, that you don't need Scabs to win the game when you've already got a minion based setup that's quite aggressive. But let's look at Bozzdton's next deck here. It's going to be this Face Hunter again with those Felmors, and I don't really see anything that's too crazy. I guess outside of the double True Aim Crescent, which I struggle to put 1 in the list, if I'm honest, until I play it with Rhino and be like, okay, this card's pretty good. But 2, I'm not sure if I can get behind that right now as Hunter.
Yeah, it's certainly we've talked a little bit about some of the builds of Hunter, and people are going back and forth significantly, but not quite as much as people are going back and forth on the builds of Warlock. Soul Rend, I think, is going to be a fantastic option to have. I do think this is a very, very effective anti-aggro version of the deck, if you want to look at it like that. It's almost wholly replaced kind of the day one list that Dog was playing, for example, that a lot of people stuck with for a little bit, which was the armor vendor, bread maker, Gadgetzan auctioneer version, which was really, really anti-aggro, had a lot of taunts, a lot of protection, a lot of extra health gain, and then it had that auctioneer as the one-off fatigue yourself win condition at the end of the game. Whereas this version has come along now, is a little bit more aggressive, but still has that anti-aggro slant to it, and it's kind of filled that gap where you don't really see that armor vendor version come out too much anymore. But still, for the same reasons as why I never really got on board with the control version, I tend not to favor this one, is because I find it a little bit slow, a little bit clunky, and a little bit one-dimensional. But I will certainly agree that there are a pile of matchups, your shamans, your paladins, your hunters, where Soul Rend is a fantastic card to have access to.
Yeah, it's such a big deal because especially the whole point of the deck with having the fatigue style is if you clear up 5 minions off your enemy board and discard 5 cards, you just don't care, because the most important part is you're also never discarding the quest, right? Because the minion is built into the quest and not into your deck. So the only thing you're really bothered about in the game, discarding, you're never going to discard anyway, unless you do what I've done sometimes and proc it with 10 cards in hand like an idiot. But I'm sure everyone's done that once, come on. But let's dive straight in. It's going to be this Hunter on the top from Bozzzton, trying to race down this Warlock from Frenetic.
That is a very racy looking hand. Yeah. There is a number of ways this curve can be played out. With none of your 1-drops being spells, it would seem like Coin Kolkar is not really necessary here. Like sometimes when you have Adorable Infestation, Demon Companion, right, like when those are your 1-mana cards, you can go Coin Kolkar. But in this position, I think with Intrepid Initiate, I like just maxing out on board presence right now on turn 1.
Yeah, this is nice because if you go any other way, it's answerable, right? Because there's Drain Soul would kill one of them, but I don't think there's a real good way in this version of Warlock to actually just answer all 3 on this turn. So it gives Bozzzton something, and sometimes they just don't have any removal, and you can start pushing maximum damage. And now after seeing the Drain Soul, Kolkar Pack Runner is kind of just a 2-3, doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah, Frenetic will be Frenetic will be extremely pleased to have had the Drain Soul, but he will be even more pleased that the second Drain Soul has come into hand there, and the second Mortal Coil now as well, which means he's kind of paying, he's kind of reclaiming the debt, right, by not life tapping. Like, tapping with this deck is very important. Oh my goodness, that's perfect. He's getting the debt back that he's not life tapping, but because he's hit 2 coils, he's caught back up on that card draw, and then also found the tour guide off the top to be able to fill out that curve and get the 0-mana life tap on the following turn. However, that kind of equalizes the way this early game has gone, I think, because Frenetic up until that point had been extremely lucky with the way things were going.
This is insane. Like Frenetic has had great responses, don't get me wrong, but again, like now looking at the hand, this next draw or so is going to have to be very, very powerful because Battlemaster's not going to do anything here. Raised Dead currently is only tour guide because Frenetic's hand's been full of removal, but now Bozzzton, with the help of Drawing Wife and now just having the second runner with spells to back it up, this Demon Companion, if this is something aggressive and basically anything but the taunt one, then this is going to be so much damage here that Bozzzton's pushing through. Even so, like even after Frenetic removing so much of the early game.
Giant's not really the draw, is it? Does allow him to start fighting back on tempo a little bit. It'll give him a tool that he can use to trade down the 3/7 on the following turn, but it's just not really the answer he needed. He was going to be needing that Soul Rend really more than anything else at that point.
Yeah, I mean, it's a relatively early Giant, but it's not really early enough for this board state. I do just wonder which way Bozzzton's going to go with this turn, though, because he could respect it with this piercing shot, or he could just pierce. He could just go all face and just piercing shot the Hyena or aim shot hero power instead, and just act like the Giant doesn't exist. A part of me likes that, honestly. This will give him, if he goes aim shot hero power, puts him very, very low. He gets an extra 1/1 to then target with piercing shot after the fact. Because you'd imagine something's going to live outside of exactly Soul Rend draw, right? Like, it's unlikely this board gets fully cleaned up. Yeah, I like this a lot.
Yeah, I think the all-phase plan is very, very sensible here because honestly, you don't really have to worry that much about playing around that much, right? Because there hasn't been a Soul Rend, there hasn't been really aggressive tapping and cycling, so the deck is still very full, right? So it's not like any big lifesteal swings, any big taunts, any of the powerful things the deck can really do are going to come down this turn. So you would expect to just kind of have free reign over dealing as much damage as you can as quickly as you can, and that's exactly what's going to happen here for Bozzzton, who's going to be able to close out game number 2 with the piercing shot.
Yep. Even without at this point, right? Lethal on board here for him with just the hero power, so pick your poison here. And Frenetic, it looked like a great opening, but Bozzzton answered with just a great series of draws, and of course, the wife being drawn nice and early was a huge deal, pushing that extra damage, but no Soul Rend, and just not really having the backup there for Frenetic, just lost him that game, really. That was just so much damage. It still feels weird to think about because of how strongly Frenetic answered those minions.
Yeah, it was an insane start, but honestly, the Enraged Mankrik just so early just changed the complexion of the entire game, right? Because suddenly, not only was it 3 extra damage straight away, it was just a minion that was never going to get dealt with. And I think both of those things were relevant, right? Because not only did it mean that the extra damage was being pushed, but it also removed School Spirits outs and Soul Rend outs. It also meant that the extra damage, like, you know, up to 6 extra a turn because of the 3 that came initially and then the 3 extra that was being pushed, meant that Frenetic never felt comfortable playing Raise Dead, which meant Tour Guide never came down, which meant that, you know, more life taps couldn't come into play. He couldn't get through his deck as quickly. He couldn't find that Soul Rend that he needed to swing the board. But, you know, swings and roundabouts in the end, because yes, Bozzzton had an incredibly aggressive start, but Frenetic did have like the absolute nuts answers to it. But it really was just that early Enraged Mankrik draw that really just flipped everything on its head in the end.
Yep, and now for me, it sounds negative, not my usual stuff here, but one of the, I guess, lesser matchups, at least in my opinion right now, which is going to be the Mage Mirror, I believe we've got coming up here for Bozzzton and Frenetic. Both players are bringing pretty different lists, though. Bozzzton's here is running let me check, yeah, the 1 Combustion in there as well, which again isn't going to really fare too well in this specific matchup. But outside of that, a very clean sort of 2-off list. There's no Devolving Missiles in there. There's no 1 Thieves in there either. Whereas Frenetic's going the other way. He's running that 1 Hot Streak, but then double 1 Thief in his list to maybe even lean more into those not only playable minions to target with freeze effects mainly, or other spells, I guess, but also the 1 Thieves themselves getting the certain spell schools of cards that you need to really cycle the quest quickly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. This time, Frenetic has... I mean, this is I guess the standard list we've been seeing from most people so far. There are a few players playing the Auctioneer list in Europe overall, which I think is more guaranteed to kill you when it gets towards the end of the quest, but has a harder time getting there. But I think overall we've been seeing more and more players play this. And I think the 1 Thief has become surprisingly universal, surprisingly quickly, especially in Grandmasters as well, because it obviously does have downside. You can have those absolute bricks where you play Refreshing Springwater and then suddenly just have a big oopsie, especially because your turn is so conditional when you play Refreshing Springwater, right? Like, you always have a plan for what you're doing after the Springwater. It's just, I'll do this first, and then I'll get my mana back. And then sometimes you don't, and that's an absolute disaster. But I think, you know, to a person, everyone has agreed in Grandmasters, at least predominantly in the European region, that 1 Thief is worth the addition because of how problematic it can become to cast your frost spells when the majority of the field is playing combo decks against you and is learning very quickly just not to play those minions.
And I think it's something that's really interesting with probably just specifically this week of Grandmasters, because one, we're right off the back of a brand new expansion, and two, because of these sort of late resubmissions, I think the one thing is I've only really started seeing in the past day and a half, really, maybe 2 days at a max, and obviously these submissions would have been a little bit earlier than that potentially as well. So these lists you're seeing right now, and you'll get to see this maybe a little bit more when we look at some of the other lists here from Bozzzton. I'm just checking though. Okay, is banned out. He's piled in. He's banned for this match. These lists are very up to date. They were literally submitted this morning for Europe. So these are pretty fresh, and you see some of the differences in these builds. And maybe it's going to be a factor this week that some of the players that didn't adapt quick enough or haven't really looked at or kept up to date with the newest versions and resubmitted those might end up being on the losing side of this.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was expecting perhaps to see a lot more updated Paladin, for example. More Blessing of Authority plus Wind Fury, more stealth minions, more jungle Panther, blah, 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 and so on. All of these methods that are very, very all in on just like stick a minion, conviction, lower their bit, and then end the game, right? Because those have become very popular and been pushing up time after time, pushing up the ranks and competing with some of the Warlock players to the top of the Legend ranks, which seems like as good a time as any. Donkey kindly pointed out that Zerios made me look the fool. I think literally like 2 minutes before I said on air that Blyze was #1 on 2 servers, Zerios had taken it back on Europe. But I think with Warlock, I'm saying I think this time, so don't call me out again if I'm wrong on that one. But the Paladins have been up there as well recently with some of these new innovations, and I think a lot of players have leaned that way a little bit. We're seeing some hammers come in and we're seeing some blessings come in, but we haven't really quite seen the evolution in Paladins that I was expecting. But you are absolutely right. This is one of the most up-to-date weeks of Hearthstone decks that you will ever see, because normally it's a good 48 hours between deck submission and playing, right? Whereas here it was like 8 hours between deck submission and playing. Like, it's ridiculously up-to-date.
Yep, especially with how fast the meta does develop. I know the start of every expansion, this one as well, like I would go to bed, wake up, and I'd be like, oh, these are like 6 new decks people are saying are the best. Oh, best get to work. Most importantly though, Bozzzton does have that flow cast now, so everything is going to be reduced down. Not too many options this turn though, but he's starting to just stack a good amount of damage now. Double Apexis Blast, Ignite, and Rune Orb. Do you think this can just be a plan to just go for burn and not overly worry about the quest at this point?
There certainly could be. We saw, who was it in APAC that we saw execute that? Was it Gur who got it done?
I believe so, yes.
Was just like a straight-up burn gamer and just didn't even really get the quest going. Like, it certainly can be done, and you've got to look out for opportunities to get there. Also, interesting, as we've talked about a little bit, the Apexis Blast edition in Bozzzton's deck does lean him towards being able to do that a little bit more, because he can, he has that extra burn option in his deck that does stick board as well. So maybe that is something that both players will be looking towards a little bit. But, generally this mirror is difficult to navigate, as I'm sure you do know, Raven, because, it's basically this constant scramble to be completing the frost parts of your quest, right? Because you're both just trying to deny that from the other side. So I think it's a very, very tricky mirror to play, and a little bit of a clowny one as well. Yeah,
it's difficult as well, because the second you make certain decisions to duplicate spell schools you've already cast in the quest because you can't do a frost one and go face, and then you might draw a castable frost. Oh no, have I messed this up now? Does this slow my quest down? Do I ignore the frost spell and just keep going face anyway? I just think, looking at this hand from Bozzzton though, with double Apexis Blast and the Ignite, if you're going to do it, this isn't a bad hand to do it with, I guess, is my overall point.
It certainly does look that way, right?
The only weird thing is the Apexis Blast gives Frenetic a minion to then do his frost stuff with, so then are you gifting your opponent this? It's so difficult.
It's an awkward card as well, right? Because it's also 5 mana, no spell school, which is like catastrophic in a lot of cases, which is why it's not even in some people's deck, or most people's decks, I should say. So it's honestly like a branching path right now as to where Bozzzton wants to take this game, right? Because he can try and just win on straight burn, and that means casting Apexis Blast, but that's gaining burn damage, but it's losing quest completion, and it's also, on average, accelerating quest completion on the other side for your opponent because of the targets for the frost spells. So you really do veer a hard left or right off the road at this point in the game, and it does look like Bozzzton is choosing to go for outright damage here.
Oh,
hello.
Rat King. I do like this decision overall. I think it is tipped over the edge that he does have Ring Toss in his hand, which now is corrupted due to using the Apexis Blast. And also, if he wasn't going to do this, then is he just passing this turn? You like ping pass or something? Like, that's got to be worse than just punching your opponent in the face.
It would seem that way, yes. Bozzzton, as he is known to do, took the full time to consider the pros and cons of that turn, but I think in the end he's just kind of following what his hand tells him to do, right? Which is try and perhaps stick one minion that can maybe attack face once and just, you know, focus on the burn that he does have available to him.
What shall I do? There's only so much time.
Is he going to activate this? Is it fire he's got left?
Check, it is just fire, yeah.
So yeah.
Complete the quest step, yeah.
Kind of funny as well, because it probably looks a little bit weird because Bozzzton does have a minion to be targeting that with the spell, but the fact that he kills off his own minion because it means that if Bozzzton wants to start targeting stuff, he has to use his own minion that he's obviously played and tried to push damage with himself. The second freeze, big deal for Frenetic there, just getting that done and dusted so it's out of the way whilst the minion's still on the board.
Yeah, big decisions to be made next turn now for Frenetic, because he needs Fire plus Arcane to actually get Arcanist Dawngrasp on the following turn. However, the only Arcane spell he currently has is Cram Session, which is obviously the absolute nuts post Dawngrasp. So I imagine we'll be seeing that position where he will start the turn with Springwater next turn, looking for something else to do with his Arcane tick other than that Cram Session, and then the decision will be made.
Do you like Bozzzton just putting his foot down now and committing, going for another Apexis Blast?
I don't really see anything superior to it, because he's already has the minion in play, right? So it doesn't matter too much if he's getting more on top of that, but he's going to go for something a little bit different, start stacking up some of this burn damage in hand instead, and actually trying to get some quest completion done as well. But it does look like he's going to end up being significantly behind on that front here.
Yeah, I believe he went Mirror Entity and rigged Fair Game, which is kind of interesting. Probably the setup for getting his own Dawngrasp, but not in the way he wants it. On board, right? He just gains a 7/7 instead of having the Battlecry effect. One Thief could put a stop to that, though.
That's the spot I was talking about, right? He just missed out on a bunch of mana cheat from the Springwater because of the One Thief, but he had thankfully already hit the... how am I forgetting the card of the name of the most common card in European GM? Incanter's Flow, even. He had already hit the Incanter's Flow,
and the reason
as he already had the Arcane activation that he needed.
The reason I paused, like, where's he going with this? Because you can't mean Incanter's Flow. There's no way you forgot the name of that card. But it was! I actually really like the more I'm sat thinking about this Mirror Entity, I really like it because there's no world in which Frenetic's going to play around it.
Isn't he? He saw multiple secrets that it's not already, right? Like where he saw that it's not Counterspell, for example. So is your opponent really picking Oasis Ally in that position? You also get Knowledge, right? No, actually no, because they're picked off Ring Toss, right? Yeah, and they're picked off Ring Toss, which is different.
I guess also the fact that outside of 2 One Thieves, Frenetic can't play around it, so...
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take anything away from Bozzzton. I think it was a smart choice from Bozzzton because your odds are very, very high that you're going to be getting a 7/7 out of it.
Yeah, Bozzzton just doing what he can now to get this quest done. Wait, was that his first quest proc? I didn't know it was that bad. Okay, well, yeah, definitely. We're definitely sticking to the burn plan here, aren't we? Because
Yep.
there's nothing else going for him at this point. He's doing a good job, though. Of course, there's the secret up for Frenetic, but even this turn, Frenetic has Dawn Grasp and Cram Session, and then needs to rely on some good draws off the back there if he really wants to have a pop-off turn.
I've proven myself. I demand answers.
No!
He does have like Hot Streak into Fireball available if he needs it. First Flame will do the job now as well. If he really does need to.
Oh, yeah, he can't. He's just one off Fire Sale, right?
It's one off Fire Sale. Didn't find the double discounted Fireball. It was only one discount anyway, so that wouldn't have been available. So he has to go for the second Flame option instead with the Hot Streak just to clear up. But that does leave the 7/7 on the other side of the board, and somehow just sticking to Apexis Blast and going face and dealing damage. Bozzzton is now finding himself in a fantastic spot out of nowhere.
Also with double Flurry, he can just not care about this this 7/7 here for Frenetic, right? He can just freeze this turn, freeze it next turn if he wants. He's going to use it to progress his own quest, of course, but still, just the fact that he doesn't have to care about it is a big deal because Frenetic's going to have to care about Bozzzton's.
Oh, no damage though. He had some lethal outs there off the discovered spell, didn't hit them.
Can still shuffle his Fire Sales, right? I think that's a good place to go to right now.
He's digging. That's a fireball off the top for Bozzzton.
Again? Was that the other Fire Sale again?
That is
Fire Sale high five.
Again. Yeah. He is just trying to cycle through this quest as possible as he can, as quick as he can. That's Arcane with the devolving missiles. But he is going to go swapping again. I think he's realized he's hit some potential mis-sequencing here. He does get the primordial studies though to bail himself out of it. I think he wanted to devolving missiles there as his Arcane spell to actually start completing quests, but realized that he'd frozen the minion again before devolving missiles. So had to divert a little bit, and I'm afraid it's a little bit of classic Bozzzton coming into play there as potentially punished a little bit by the rope. Oh, the second fireball! One card away.
Now for Frenetic, let's look at some damage here. Still has the full 8 mana after casting the Spring Water. Does have that 4-cost Fireball, Ruined Orb for 5 there. Fireball will be 9, of course, without the addition of any more spell damage.
So 14 more as it stands right now, which means Primordial Studies ping? Is that not just lethal? If he gets, he would need to get exactly Lab Partner.
He won't have the mana, right?
No? Oh, no, you won't. No, you're absolutely right. He'll be 1 off. Yeah, you are right. Forgetting that he needs to pay the 1 for the Primordial to begin with.
Imagine paying mana for stuff in Mage.
I know, ridiculous, right?
Look at this 4 mana Fireball. It's like 2014 Fireball there.
There's only so much time.
Looking for those ignites, I imagine, right? Yep, there's one.
It's the ignite.
Time.
That partner now, that ignite that he just drew deals 6. He has 5 more off the Ruined Orb.
6 more.
Oh, with the Lab Partner as well, yep. He's just going to have to pray, but unfortunately not going to get there. He needed additional help off the Ruined Orb in the end, could not find it, and Bozzzton, after sitting back and waiting for all of those animations to resolve, is now going to have the simple task of pointing the Fireball downtown, and that was a weird game for sure. Bozzzton, I think, really being dictated to by the way his deck works, because he has those additional Apexis Blast in there, kind of did all that he could do, which was play more aggressively for tempo and damage. And you saw that even though he was significantly behind on quest completion, how ahead he was on damage did end up paying out in the end. So perhaps a little lesson for it for you there, and just how to play the Mage Mirror, because that threat of damage did start to get very scary very quickly. And even though those minions were very nice targets for Frenetic for the whole game to be able to be using his spells and completing his quest, they do still require to be dealt with, or else they're going to deal damage to the opponent. And I think that constant threat did give Frenetic a lot of problems that game.
Yeah, I think it's actually a nice reminder of no matter how sort of crazy the meta can become, how intricate Hearthstone decks can get or whatever, it's just a reminder for back to basics Hearthstone, where if there's 2 Apexis Blast in your hand and not much else, Apexis Blast them and go, right? I think it's that kind of sort of bringing everything all the way back to simple Hearthstone again and playing with what you've got in hand, as opposed to just hoping for something better to kind of emerge out of nowhere and save the day. So yeah, I really like the approach there from Bozzzton. I did wonder just from seeing that hand whether he was going to go for it, and it did pay off. Although, as you can see, Frenetic got very close because of the sheer power of the quest progression, of course. And double flow over here in Europe, as always, as Bozzzton has his Skulker. Triple flow, if you think about it, with the Shadow Step.
Derek made some excellent points earlier about how, you know, we're not very friendly to like new people who come into the scene, that, you know, casual players don't understand the game that well and are trying to, you know, just listen casually, or maybe you're kind of listening to us as radio commentary while you're just doing the dishes or jamming Hearthstone yourself or whatever else. With the like 4 layers deep of in-jokes and referential names and things that we give to things. But at the same time, it's fun. I'm going to keep doing it. So yeah, Bozzzton has double flow in his opening hand, so that's excellent. You love to see that.
I was interested where you were going with that conversation, because it wasn't too long ago in this day of casting that you shouted at me for saying Battlegrounds Battlemaster, not Lotheb. So I was like, where's he? Is he going to start berating me for saying flow now? Because I'm not having this.
I mean, that would be peak Sottle, right? You just naturally take the anti-Raven stance in everything that you say. Yeah.
Or the parent stance, which is do as I do, do as I say, not as I do. One of those. But most importantly, Skulker number 1 down. That is now going to make the card drawn from Bozzzton next cost 1 less, which does have a pretty big impact, especially on some of these more expensive SI cards in the deck.
Yeah, but I guess to explain the point and actually bring some substance to the joke, the reason why this card in particular, SI Skulker, is referred to as Flow in Rogue is that it actually has somewhat similar mulligan win rates. You know, Flow, Incanter's Flow in Mage has become well known as like the highest win rate mulligan card in the game for multiple metagames now. It's just kind of an I win card in your opening hand. And SI7 Skulker is a 2-mana card that is actually comparable. It's not quite there, but it's comparable in terms of win rate. At least it was early on in the metagame, which is where it kind of picked up that nickname as being Flow for Rogue.
And I like this a lot. I talked about this in the previous Rogue game from Bozzzton, that you don't be scared about using those Shadow Steps, right? I mean, this is obviously a very good card to use them on. The next card drawn is now going to be -2 mana cost.
Oh, yeah.
It does proc his quest. He gets a weapon, which is huge. That's just 6 damage banked. But just using those Shadow Steps to get this cycle going is very, very strong indeed.
We think about Coin Swindle instead, because there's a chance. No, I suppose there isn't. Right?
-2 mana, he'll always be able to swindle next turn, right?
Well, is that true? Because you do just draw 1 card, and it might just be some weird situational, unplayable card that you don't want to use, right? And, okay, the other Swindle's pretty sick. I was going to say you could also do nothing and then, like, Gyroblade Swindle, but that doesn't make any sense. You're, like, floating 1 mana this turn to save the coin. That's nonsense. So I think in the end, just coining the Swindle does make the most sense overall.
I will say as well, on your point about floating mana, is I think this deck especially, obviously it's never good to float mana if you can help it, but this deck, you need to utilize every single mana you have, because it's not the most powerful deck in the game right now, so you need to kind of do the most optimal broken things the deck can do to be able to keep up with some of these really nutty decks we have in the game right now. This is one card actually... Oh, go on. This is
time.
This is one card I didn't find myself liking too much, which was Tenwu. I didn't feel there were that great targets to bounce. It just felt like an expensive Shadow Step, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing. But I did look at a few other cards, even just dropping in Neophytes in the list. At least the list I was playing at the time didn't have Neophytes. So I'm very interested, just if we see more of Quest Rogue, just to see the impact Tenwu actually has on games.
Yeah, I mean, I do think people are, again, influenced by the fact that this deck I think it's one of the most tunnel vision straightforward do the quest decks, right? Where you do just play the SI cards as quickly as you can. So I think people are quite heavily built around that when they build the deck. So they either go with like Scabs, which is if you have lots of SI cards in your hand already, you can play lots of them very quickly, or they go with things like Tenwu, which is if I don't have enough SI cards, I can use Tenwu to play more of them in the way that I do Shadow Step, as you saw there with the early Shadow Steps on turn 3. And so those generally tend to be where people go to for the last couple of cards that are floating in the deck, but if anything, we saw from the last metagame that, you know, a aggressive board-based rogue strategy can evolve very quickly in terms of what the last 5 or 6 cards look like a couple of weeks in. You just need to wait for Casey to tell you what to play, basically. That's essentially how it works.
But what if he says Garrett Rogue, and then I'm just like, well, I can't play that deck. I guess I'm just not playing Rogue another expansion.
Yeah.
Okay, this could be pretty nice. I guess it doesn't really progress the quest. I was looking at double Neophyte again, but maybe you could just go Neophyte, bounce the God, I can't remember the name of now.
Operative.
Operative is that one, isn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You just bounce the Operative to progress the quest a bit more.
Yeah, he is on an interval as well. Like, this does complete a questline stage, which does always seem more appealing. It's kind of a cognitive trap, but it always seems more exciting to do the second one than the first one when it's on an out of 2 counter.
Yeah, let's take a look at what this card is going to be here, because we talk a lot, we've talked a lot about the weapon. Oh, Scab, sorry, yeah, of course. But we've talked a lot about the weapon. It's hard to keep track.
Oh, it's the Mage quest. Where did that come from?
No, because let me finish. We talk a lot about the weapon dealing a lot of damage, of course. There's the +2 and stealth, +2 attack and stealth, which is huge. But the mole I found in a lot of matchups is also incredible. Like, I've actually just won a ton of games based off that, just generating silly cards, especially when you combine it with Lotheb to be able to actually generate multiple cards in the same turn. It's pretty sick.
Choosing to freeze out instead of removing the final minion. I imagine he wants to leave up that target and just shoot it with Ignite anyway to continue proccing the quest, which he does do, yeah. Quite a productive turn considering he's been hit with a Neophyte here.
Really nice timing as well, being able to freeze, then have the Shatter, right, to be able to just say, Deep Freeze, sorry, to be able to just say, like, no, on that quest. Here comes Scabs, though. Only 1 mana spare, very early Scabs here, so I imagine he almost has to go for the stealth.
Yeah, he's going to drop it, and that is going to require some more freezes on the other side, because that's another swing of the weapon for 3 damage, and now there is Wind Fury plus the 3 damage weapon again on the following turn, coming through for that 21 that he needs to do. Going to need to not hit One Thief there, and there's the One Thief! I mentioned it going into this series, and it's happened twice to Frenetic.
I believe he has Flurries left in the deck, right? So he could still draw for Flurry with Arcane Intellect.
Deep Freeze, Cram Session, and Shooting Star with the options.
Wait, was it better to go Arcane Intellect there? I guess he doesn't know there's a Battle Master, but...
No, he doesn't know there's a Battle Master, but there's an inkling. He knows if there is a Battle Master.
Like,
yeah, and he knows if there is a Battle Master, he's dead.
Yeah,
right?
wow.
Out for the rest of the damage and guaranteed cards with the hidden Gyroblade, so... That is going to be a pretty straightforward victory in the end, going out 3-1 for Bozzzton. Very nicely done. Very good performance, good start to the season for Bozzzton, but a disappointing start to the season for our defending champion. Of course, Frenetic does still have things to play for, even though he does have Worlds in his mind, I'm sure, locked up already. However, new ruling this time around, if the defending champion from Season 1 gets relegated in Season 2, they do actually miss out on that Worlds place. However, they are given a buffer of 5 points to make that increasingly unlikely. But still, I don't think Frenetic will want to be getting too sweaty too quickly, right, about how close he is to the relegation zone if he has a particularly poor start. But I think that 5 points, and I think how good a player he showed himself to be last season will mean he'll be all right in a few weeks' time. Sure.
Because I like to put positive spins on things. If I was Frenetic, I'd just not look at anything else all weekend. Look at